As part of CACI's commitment to the public sector, we partner with the local Area Research and Intelligence Association, or LARIA for short. Our principal role has been to share best practice and promote effective use of data, which has also been supported by many of our public sector clients. CACI have also presented at many LARIA conferences and webinars where we focused on key challenges and shared valuable insights that can be used to evidence decision making. We've recorded a series of video podcasts that will provide viewers with an introduction to LARIA, insights drawn from a recent member survey, as well as discuss challenges linked to the cost of living. Earlier in the year, LARIA and CACI ran a member survey, and in this session, we're talking to LARIA's chair, Kate Waterhouse, about the results. For those of you who don't know Kate, she is the Executive Director of Strategy and Transformation at Bury Council. So hi Kate.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're here today to talk about the survey that we conducted earlier on in the year. What I'd like to do is just go through a couple of questions that we have seen some kind of significant results for to get your comments on. Now, the first question, which of the following policy areas do you think that your organisation should focus its research, intelligence and policy resources in the next 12 months? Now, the top 5 results to that were health and wellbeing, with about 17%, corporate and business service level transformation, which is about 14%, the environment, which was 12%, and economic growth and regeneration, which is also 12%, and finally adult social care, 11%. Now, whilst this is not totally unexpected, how do you think local authorities should tackle these big topics, and what data should they be using?
Yeah, in terms of those results to the survey, seeing health and wellbeing the top one, as you say, not totally unexpected given where we are in terms of still responding to the impact of the pandemic. But I was a bit surprised. I thought maybe children and young people, education might have been the top one because we know that's been a big focus in terms of recovery. Thinking about it, I wondered, is that because perhaps organisations are more used to doing the children's and education data and information? Perhaps they've still got teams, people who are doing those statutory returns. So it's not seen as a new request on them, but it is still important work. Whereas perhaps preparing for new inspections within adult social care, the new CQC regime is what's brought that to the top, especially because potentially when this survey was being done, a lot of areas were involved in pilots of that. But also still, as you say, it is such an important issue in terms of the response to the pandemic. In terms of what we do about it, I think it's still important to look at what data sets are available and what we can do to work together to share best practice in using that information to answer the questions. A lot of areas are faced with the same issues, the same challenges, and so where we can, it's good to try and pool resources because we know that capacity is limited for some of our members. So that's kind of the main thing that I would be saying is use your LARIA network to look for people who are potentially doing the same kind of research or wanting to answer the same kind of questions. I think we also need to look at data sharing again, look at where sources of data are. That changes all the time. I think it's important we look to the private sector, to commercial organisations, as well as to our own partnerships and potentially academia, universities as well. So we need to keep trying to evolve the partnership network and the data that we've got.
And it's great that you said that about partnerships because we talked about that previously in the Meet the Chair session where we were talking about partnerships and how integral they are to success. And I think, certainly the work that we do is moving much more in that direction where more and more people are working together. They're using consistent data sets across the partnerships. So I think it's really great to hear that that's your kind of view on that too. So the second question that we talked about or we asked in the survey was, which of the following activities do you think that your organisation should focus its research and intelligence policy resources on in the next 12 months? Now, the overwhelming response from all respondents, which is about 42%, was that it was to support vulnerable people. Now, this is followed by supporting health and social care services, like we just talked about, improving community engagement, supporting public health interventions, and improving the environment. Now, as it's the role of local government to support the most at risk and vulnerable in the community, why do you think supporting the vulnerable remains or still remains, a key focus for LARIA members and the wider local government sector?
In terms of supporting vulnerable people and why that's a priority to our membership, I think it's because the experience in COVID showed the power of using data and intelligence to make sure resource got to where it was needed, but importantly that we understood that need.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's still up there, because it allowed some really important decisions to be taken, but also it showed where support was most needed. So I think the reason that is there is probably a testament to some of the great work that was done during the COVID response, how we combined data sources to really understand our communities and then the impact it had. So for things like public health, where it's helped to maintain take-up of vaccinations, we're able to use data and intelligence to understand who's most at risk and then what it's like to be their attitudes towards getting things like vaccinations and other public health interventions. And that makes sure that then our campaigns are targeted in the right way and we really get through to those who need it. But as those responses have just shown us, it's not just about health and care. We also know that the COVID response and the cost of living response is coming together now to support people with a wider set of needs around things like employment and education and financial support. So we're using those techniques that we saw the benefit of during the COVID response and now using it in a broader set of circumstances.
And I think interestingly, previously we were talking about doing more with less. I mean, what kind of an impact does that have? Because obviously the challenges still remain as we've come out of COVID and we're in cost of living. But, you know, how does that affect authorities?
I think that's a good question. How has research changed really in local authorities? And I guess if you rolled back 10, 15 years, there would have been a lot of reliance on doing our own surveys, of doing our own field work, questionnaires out with the general public. That's very expensive, and now we need to use different techniques to try to understand our communities and get that same kind of data. So we are more reliant on using data sets such as the one that CACI use around segmentation and understanding resident profiles, but also publicly available data sets through ONS. We've got that recent census data that's coming through, which is invaluable in terms of understanding local communities. So I think we've seen a shift towards using more secondary research and then supplementing it where we can show there is need with that kind of face-to-face engagement.
And I think that interesting what you say that about using kind of multiple data sources or secondary insights. That's what we're seeing. That whole kind of blended data approach is really key. So that's interesting to hear. So look, we've been talking about COVID, so rightly bringing on to a question about COVID. So we asked a question in the wake of COVID, and as we now face increases to the cost of living, the biggest challenge for respondents was capacity limitation. So that's the lack of capacity, which comes from the need for councils to make efficiencies, while at the same time still being required to provide high quality services to meet the needs of residents. Now, we've just been talking about that, so I'm sure you're no stranger to that. But what should councils do to tackle that increasing challenge? And is there anything that LARIA could do to support colleagues facing that right now?
In terms of what LARIA can do to support members to do more with less, in terms of the obvious capacity restrictions that there are in some local authorities, especially the smaller ones, we tend to advise a number of different techniques. I think first, always remember to look within your council. There will be lots of different sources of data. There's probably lots of different people who've access to data. They don't always come together. So that's always a good place to start. But I think then you can look beyond that to the wider LARIA membership, look to your neighbouring authorities, look to statistical neighbours, other partners who may be able to share resources with you. Again, the COVID experience showed us that lots of partners have lists of vulnerable residents or vulnerable customers. And actually, if we brought that together, we got a really good understanding of those communities, perhaps through slightly different lenses and different data sets. So that's definitely worth exploring to try and make capacity go a little bit further.
And do you think that there are still organisations that work in silo, irrespective of the fact that we've gone through COVID and we've all been joining up together?
Probably not as much as used to be the case, but I think what we had during COVID was a sense of urgency and almost legitimacy as to why we were data sharing and what that data was being used for. We need to work a little bit harder now. We're back into almost business as usual situations to not let some of that slip away, because there is a lot that we can do and a lot that we can share, even if it's not personal information. We can still share a lot of intelligence about our neighbourhoods that help us to understand a local patch.
And ultimately help you provide the right services and in the right places, which is key. So another question that we asked was that we were seeing increases in local authorities using data visualization tools like Power BI and Tableau, and actually 41% of all the respondents actually said that they use Power BI. Why do you think we've seen such an increase in use of this kind of technology, and how do you see this developing in the future? And I think, again, what is there that LARIA can do to support members of LARIA and wider local government using these tools?
To me, the use of new technology probably is a result of some of the things we've spoken about reduced capacity. So a lot of what things like Power BI and Tableau can bring is automation. So where we used to have to sweat over lots and lots of Excel spreadsheets, we can now use the power of a computer to bring tables together and do a lot of that data crunching. Tend to still need real humans to keep a check on the validity of that information, but there is a lot that can be done through the use of technology. The other advantage of things like Power BI and Tableau is it puts the data in the user's hands as well. So therefore it means you're not always, as the analyst, having to be the gatekeeper for information. We can put more into the public domain within our own organisations. People can run their own queries, produce their own presentations, but safe in the knowledge that they're using the right data that's been appropriately sourced.
Single version of the truth.
Indeed, the holy grail. So I think that's a reason why it spreads, because it shares that access to information across the whole organisation. What can LARIA do to support the use of new technologies? We're really proud of being a sort of network of networks. So we like to introduce our members to networks of people who are particular Tableau users or Power BI users, or perhaps are using something to do with a specific question or in a specific sector. And so we don't claim to have all the answers ourselves, but we like to be able to support those networks through introductions and helping people get to the right place to get the right advice.
And I guess also sharing best practice as well. So where you're seeing others doing the same, that's how you can get in touch.
Of course, and a plug for the LARIA Awards, which absolutely celebrate the use of technology and that best practice.
Putting COVID and cost of living to one side, which I know are massive kind of challenges for the sector at the moment, we asked respondents to tell us about other big challenges that they face. And they came back with things like increased demand for services, health, budget and funding, and these were the most popular responses. Data is firmly at the heart of decision making across local government, but how do you think LARIA members and local government organisations should really tackle these challenges? And what kind of data sources should people be using to evidence decision making linked to these topics?
In terms of what LARIA members are doing now to support local decision making, for people in organisations like mine, we are now at the start of budget planning again for next year. So again, those results resonate with me and what my teams are working on at the moment. In terms of being able to answer some of those questions, I think understanding increased demand and where that demand's coming from is really important. And again, organisations will have data on that. No one will know that better than you as an organisation. And what you need to do is make sure that that data is flowing through in a way that you can use it for corporate and central decision making. So again, there's lots of good practice on that LARIA can support with. I think there's an advantage to using national data sets and publicly available data sets because they give you that contextual information. You know, is this happening everywhere else? Are we an outlier? What are our neighbours doing? And it helps you to put information into context, which is really important when making budget decisions. But it also shows where you might want to do some local research. So again, we talked about doing that blend of using statistical information and then some real targeted community engagement.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because I think LARIA members have a duty to remind people that data isn't just numbers, data represents people.
Yeah.
And every dot on a graph is a person. And so therefore, by using that combined set of data, supplemented by some real community engagement, we can make sure that lived experience gets taken into account in budget decisions as well.
Yeah, and I think you said the key thing there, which is this is all about people and place. You know, this is all about using data and insight in a better way to actually achieve meaningful change in communities. That's great. Kate, we've come to the end of our session. We've run out of time. So I'd just like to thank you for your time today, joining us, and also to everybody who responded to the very important survey that we've been working on. We're planning on sharing some further insights drawn from the survey, and these will be shared in association with LARIA very soon. So thank you very much for coming along.
And thank you for your support.
No problem.